Good evening. I'm Matthew Ngolova.
And I'm Geraldine Sen.
As of January 1st, 2018, the Accident Compensation Commission Fiji has effectively dealt with people who have sustained motor vehicle injuries. With us tonight to tell us more is Pervez Akbar, the CEO of the Accident Compensation Commission Fiji. Good evening, Mr. Akbar, and thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Good evening. Thank you.
Now, one thing that I'd like to know is what is the role of the Accident Compensation Commission Fiji?
Right. Thank you, Matthew, for your question, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and talk to you about the Commission and the Commission's work. The role of the Commission, Commission has been established under the Accident Compensation Commission Act 2017.
Yeah.
And the role is to basically pay compensation to anyone who suffers personal injury or death as a result of a motor vehicle accident. Mm-hmm. That's the primary role of the Commission.
Of course, the rationale behind this was to cut out all the paperwork and all the legal proceedings that usually go with third-party compensation that insurance companies would pay out before. And it's something very new with this is, of course, the no-fault compensation. Now, most people don't know what that means. Could you just give us a bit more detail on exactly what this means for those who will be filing for compensation?
Sure. Now, you mentioned the reason for the Act coming in. If I can just take us back a bit in terms of where we were and where we now are. Basically, the old legislation, which was called the Motor Vehicles Third Party Insurance Act 1948, was basically, it had a lot of limitations. It was introduced in 1948, and so that in itself suggests, needed some reform.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of limitations. The no-fault aspect that you talk about is one of them. And under the old scheme, under the old legislation, if there was a motor vehicle accident and a third party was injured or died from the accident, they would have to prove fault of the driver. And so that's a huge burden to overcome for someone who's in that position. And so that's where the no-fault aspect comes in, because under the new legislation, that burden has been removed. And just that on its own, I mean, forgetting about the other advantages of the new scheme, just that on its own is a significant step forward by taking away the burden on people to have to prove fault of the accident. But of course that was one aspect of what was difficult. The other few things were that, and I've had first-hand experience of this as a lawyer practicing in this area, is that you would find that there would be inordinate delays with claims. The people would have to get lawyers involved, and if there's no agreement on compensation, it would go through the court. There's a legal battle, and people have waited for years, and we've all heard the horror stories. And look, I mean, you don't have to be in the legal profession or the insurance industry or the medical profession to know the challenges. In fact, with our 2 degrees of separation in Fiji, we all either know somebody or know somebody who knows somebody who's been a victim of a motor vehicle accident, and they will tell you what the challenges are. And delays was one of the things. There would be legal costs as well. The exclusions was another factor. The exclusions were unreasonable. Now, we have exclusions under the current legislation, but they are, they're fair and what would be reasonable exclusions. And an example of a silly situation under the old scheme would be, for example, if you had someone who was driving drunk. Now that would basically potentially exclude an innocent pedestrian from compensation. And so that sort of ridiculous situation is avoided under this new scheme. And so that's another challenge. And of course, under the old Act, only third parties were covered, and so if you'd have passengers, for example, they'd be excluded from from applying for compensation or seeking compensation. So there were a number of these limitations which basically acted as a catalyst for government to push for a change in this area and introduce this legislation.
Of course, this is not brand new. This has been adapted from something that exists in New Zealand, and you've got prior experience with that.
Yes. So I've after leaving Fiji, I practiced as an employment lawyer as well as a health and safety law in New Zealand, and I've had the opportunity to work with the ACC scheme there. And of course, the no-fault aspect is applied there as well. And of course, the model is based off the New Zealand model and the scheme. But I suppose there is a significant difference in that our scheme is confined to personal injuries and death arising from a motor vehicle accident only, whereas the New Zealand scheme is much wider.
Yeah.
It basically covers all personal injuries, and so our financial exposure, of course, is much less.
And is there future plans to extend that
Here at in Fiji?
in Fiji?
Well, at the moment, that's not a matter that's being discussed.
Yes.
Our focus at the moment is really to embed the processes and be able to assist people under this current act, which at the moment focuses on motor vehicle accidents. If there is a desire or if there's a need to extend at some stage, I'm sure that discussion will take place in due course.
With this levy that's been introduced, of course, people are getting sort of confused because it's something brand new, and of course, with anything that's new, there'd be a lot of confusion with it. People still get confused whether or not who they have to pay it to and what happens to the money.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's a good question. So, basically, if you've got a third-party policy at the moment from your insurance company, which you'd previously purchased before the scheme came into place, and say if you've got a policy that expires in August.
Yeah.
Come August, what you will do is you will not then be able to buy a third-party policy from the insurance company. What you will need to do is then go to LTA and pay a motor vehicle accident levy. So that's not an insurance premium; it's just a motor vehicle accident levy which you'll pay at LTA. Of course, the levies are lower than what was being paid as premiums under the third-party policies, and so that's what will happen. So you'd go to LTA to basically pay your motor vehicle accident levy, and when you do that, LTA will receive the amount from you depending on the schedule of fees they have. So they'll receive the amount from you. They'll give you a document which basically looks like that, but it just basically has information on the scheme, and it acknowledges the details of your vehicle, and then away you go. So and that then covers you basically, and any passengers and any third parties as well under the new scheme.
And is LTA the only place they can get a form like that?
Yes. So we're working with LTA because of LTA's network, and because of the fact that vehicle owners would need to be going to LTA anyway. For other fees to be paid and licensing and so on. So vehicle licensing. So the idea is that it's a one-stop shop, and so in fact that this arrangement makes it easier for everyone. And so you just go in and pay the accident levy, and away you go.
Thank you for that, Mr. Akbar. We'll be back shortly after the break. You're watching For the Record. Good evening and welcome back. Now, Mr. Akbar, with the levy and everything that you've told us so far, who is eligible to apply, that is?
Okay, so basically anybody who has suffered personal injuries from a motor vehicle accident, so or anyone who's died from a motor vehicle accident. So in the case of death, obviously the deceased person's personal representative will be able to be the applicant for compensation. But coming back to your point, so it's anybody who's been a victim of either personal injuries or death as a result of a motor vehicle accident. So if they've been a victim in that respect, they're eligible to apply.
And in the case someone does die or pass away, who does it go to? The next of kin?
So it does depend. If the person has left a will, then the person who's basically the beneficiary of that will, they will be basically involved in applying for a probate. If they haven't left a will, then they'll be basically applying for letters of administration. So that's that process. And so that, if there's a will, the will usually talks about the executor and trustee of the estate and so on. But the thing is, I think what they would need to do is get legal advice,
Okay.
and either from the local lawyer or
Yeah.
from the Legal Aid Commission is always willing to help for those who need that assistance. But that's what needs to be done in that place. And then so once you've established yourself as a personal representative, you can then you can then apply for compensation. In the case of children, so anyone under the age of 18, basically a child, parents are their personal representative, so there wouldn't be a need. So if a child has died, and we've had a case like that, where a child's died, then the parents wouldn't have to apply for the things that we've talked about.
Okay.
With, of course, making an application, what are the things that are necessary? What would they need to provide?
Sure. So there's an application form, and that form can be picked up from any branch at the LTA, any LTA branch throughout the country, and it's it just requires some basic details, your name and so on, where the accident occurred, when it occurred, what happened, and so there's some information that needs to be provided in that form. In addition to filling in that form, we would need certified true copies of documents like, for example, photo ID. So that could be your photo ID card. It could be your passport or driver's license. Anything that basically has a photo in it and identifies who you are. And so you would need a certified true copy of that. We'd need a certified true copy of the police report, a medical report, and we also look for a certified true copy of a document that just confirms that you are the holder of the bank account that you referred to, because we ask for details of your bank account because that's where we'll be making the payment.
Right.
So we just need confirmation of that as well. So those are some of the main things that are required. And as we assess and consider the application, we might find there's other information that we need from time to time, and we'll obviously reach out and ask for that.
What's the statute of limitations for when the accident occurs and from when you can file your compensation?
Okay, so an application for compensation must be made within 3 years from the date of the accident. So that's the limitation period. Of course, if that's not done within the requisite time frame, the Commission does have a discretion to extend the time frame if there are extenuating circumstances or basically good reasons why that wasn't done. But otherwise, it must be done within the 3 years.
And just to go back, with how to acquire the compensation, giving proof of identity and all that. In some cases, some Fijian families, they would usually adopt their brother or their sister's child.
Right.
And in this particular cases, there's no paperwork filed, no proof that the child is theirs. In those particular cases where the child is in an accident and passes away, what requirements would they need to?
Right. So if there's an actual adoption, I mean, if there's a formal adoption, I gather there's going to be some documentation to prove and establish that. If there's no documentation whatsoever, that'll be quite challenging. But I'm sure there's there'd be a way of establishing that through declarations and other means. But that's a good point. And so this is why if there are informal arrangements, it might pay actually to formalize it in some way. So that we are able to consider that. For sure.
But there is a plus point to having the ACCF now, especially with the court proceedings being taken out, legal costs being cut down, of course. Now it's just basically if there's an accident and you'd like to file for compensation, get your paperwork together, lodge it in with the ACCF, and then from there on, you get on with it.
Look, in terms of the process, I mean, and in terms of how this is all going to work, and has been working, is you fill in the application form, you provide all the relevant information. Now, the application, I mean, the other thing that's made easy for people is that apart from being able to pick it up at any LTA office, you can lodge it at any LTA office as well. There's a postal address where you can post it straight to us as well. But if you prefer, you can always lodge it at any LTA office. So you do that. It's lodged. It comes to us. We will assess it. We may seek further medical information or further medical assessment, which we have done in a few cases pending before us at the moment. And basically, once that's done, if we reach a point where we feel that you do qualify for compensation, we will then make you an offer. So it's actually so we don't just write a check and send it. We actually make you an offer, and we would then that's done in writing, and we offer you X amount of compensation based on our assessment of your application, and you then have 28 days to accept or decline that offer. And so if you accept the offer, you must do so within 28 days.
Right.
We get you to sign something, and then it's done. And then once that's done, we will make the payment ASAP. If you decline the offer, and this is where your court proceedings point comes in.
Yeah.
If you decline the offer, you have the choice of then going back under the old system, if you like, under common law, and seeking redress that way, rather than through the no-fault scheme. Of course, the challenge with that is that you will have to then establish liability. For, all of those things come to play because you're not acting, you're not pursuing your claim under the no-fault scheme. You're going back under common law. So but of course, if you genuinely feel that that's what you'd rather do than accept our offer, then of course you're welcome to do so. I mean, the applicants can decline our offer and then go through the older process and pursue the claim through common law. So that's the option. But that's how it'll work if they decline offer. But if they accept it, we'll make the payment ASAP.
Thank you for that, Mr. Akbar. We'll go to a quick break and then we'll be back. You're watching For the Record. Good evening and welcome back. Now, Mr. Akbar, could you give me an idea of compensation in terms of payment, like the amounts?
Sure, absolutely. And look, that's one of the other things that's really good about the scheme, is that we have prescribed amounts and maximum amounts in the legislation. So gone are the days where you have to sort of finger in the air and sort of think, what's the most I could probably get. So I can take you through some of the numbers that are in the legislation. And so in the case of permanent partial incapacity, so where there's permanent incapacity from the accident, but it's partial, the maximum is $75,000 that you get. So an assessment will be made, and if, for example, it's felt that your incapacity is at a certain percentage, the medical practitioners basically do an assessment and determine a percentage impairment in terms of how badly you've been affected. And so that assessment, and so we might find that based on the partial thing, that it might be $10,000 or $20,000. So an assessment of that nature will be made. 75,000 is, of course, just the maximum, and we'll make an offer according to that. The next amount that's there is permanent total incapacity. So there's absolute total, you've been totally incapacitated. In that situation, the maximum amount under the no-fault scheme is $150,000. And then, of course, you've got a situation where if they don't fall into either one of those two categories, then the door is left open to make an assessment. Say, for example, if it's a temporary incapacity, then the door is left open to make an assessment on that to a maximum of $75,000. And finally, in the case of death, the maximum is $75,000.
Not too many grey areas then that where people
can... No, it's quite clear, and in fact, the information sheet that you get when you in fact renew, or basically apply, when you pay your levy, has all this spelled out. So it's not state secret or anything like that. It's very clear what they are, and of course, we're always happy to clarify anything.
This would, of course, be applicable to anyone who is traveling not only in a personal vehicle, but could also be for PSV vehicles, bus drivers and bus passengers, taxi drivers.
Yeah, look, absolutely. The Act doesn't, discriminate in terms of the type of driver or the type of vehicle or the purpose and so on. I think where the licensing aspect will come in is if the driver is, for example, applying for compensation, and if the driver is not driving according to his or her licensing conditions, they would be excluded. So that's where that would come in. But of course, all the passengers and any other person, pedestrians, etc., they would all still be covered, unlike the old system.
So with that, them being covered, that would be, say, for example, the maximum payable amount that you said would be per passenger.
Exactly, and that's again another advantage of this scheme. Under the old scheme, you had a $40,000 limit. For so if you imagine a bus full of passengers, and it wasn't, and if you kept it off at 40,000, how much would anyone really get?
So that would be a 40,000 lump sum divided by the amount of
yeah,
people
yeah,
in there.
exactly. So under this scheme, these amounts, these maximum amounts, are per person and per applicant. So it's a huge shift. And look, I mean, in that sense, can I just say that a scheme of this nature, even just personal injuries and death for motor vehicle accidents,
Yeah.
is quite amazing for a country our size, to have a scheme of this nature. And like many other areas in this area, again, I think as a nation we're punching well above our weight.
With of course, all these exclusions that are up there, you would have people who would be trying to sort of hook their way into the system to try to get money, even though they do not necessarily apply.
Yes.
How do you weed that out?
Yes, you're right. And as night follows day, where money is involved, fraud and fraudsters aren't too far behind. And look, we work very closely with Fiji Police as well. With every investigation and with every application, there needs to be a police report. We have a very close relationship with Fiji Police as well, and so that'll be basically something we'll be tapping into in terms of making sure these claims are legit. We of course will be doing our own investigations and be as thorough as possible in scrutinizing these sort of applications. So the message to fraudsters is don't try.
Apart from all the exclusions that you listed, for example, those who have permits, taxi permit holders, bus permit holders, if they don't pay for the levy, but their drivers are driving and they get into an accident with passengers, what happens then?
So everybody's covered. The exclusion around non-payment of levy, and the legislation is clear on this, is where the owner fails to pay the levy, then the owner is excluded from seeking compensation.
That would mean if the owner were in the particular vehicle and that gets into an accident,
Yeah.
the driver and the passengers would get compensation apart from the owner of the permit.
Yes, provided that for the driver. So let's say we've got a situation where the owner is a passenger, hasn't paid the levy, owner is a passenger, driver's driving, you've got other passengers as well. So if the situation is just that and there's an accident and the levy hasn't been paid, the owner is excluded from applying for compensation, which is fair enough. The driver would not be excluded, provided, of course there's always a provided that any of the other exclusions don't apply. For example, he or she is not driving drunk, because if he or she if the driver is driving drunk, then the driver would be excluded as well. So say if we have just the same situation, owner is a passenger, driver's driving, he's drunk or she's drunk, they both will be excluded. Everybody else will be covered. Of course, under the old scheme, passengers, those guys wouldn't be covered.
Would that also include the driver falling asleep at the wheel?
So one of the other exclusions that is there in the Act is around someone being convicted for causing the motor vehicle accident. And so this is where, again, police investigation and the outcome of that will be critical. So in terms of if we find that there's an application by a driver of a motor vehicle, we would certainly have to wait for the outcome of our police investigation before we can determine eligibility for compensation or whether there's an exclusion in that case. But not for the passengers. We wouldn't wait for the outcome of because the outcome of the investigation is irrelevant to the passengers. They're innocent victims, no fault scheme. We would compensate them irrespective of what's happening with the driver and the owner and all. Their application, of course, needs to be subject to a police report and investigation and so on. But we wouldn't hold up processing the application of innocent people involved in the accident because of their possible exclusion.
Thank you for that. We'll just go to a quick break right now, and then we'll be back. You're watching For the Record. Good evening and welcome back. Now, Mr. Akbar, how many of you are on this commission, on the team?
Great. Well, we have a board
Yeah.
which basically supports my role, and then at this stage I'm actually shortlisting for rest of the personnel. We've advertised for an accountant and a PA, and then of course there'll be more recruitment in the near future. And I'm being supported by the secretariat team at the RPF. They've been very helpful. And administratively supported by team members at the LTA as well. So there's a lot of support around, and it's going well. And really just looking forward to getting a few team members on board as soon as possible.
So your position came into effect as of this year. How many applications have you received so far?
Sure. We've had quite a few phone inquiries, and as a result of those inquiries, people will probably be collecting information and so on, before submitting the application. But at the moment, we've got actual 5 applications for personal injuries pending before us, and those 5, 4 we've asked for further medical assessment to determine the percentage of incapacity. One was an incomplete application, so we're assisting the applicants to provide all the necessary information so that we can take it from there. So those are for personal injuries. For death, we've got in fact one where we've recently finalized an offer for compensation, and that offer has gone out to the family of a deceased child, and we're just awaiting their confirmation of acceptance, and that should be wrapped up pretty quickly. And the turnaround has been good. I mean, it's been pretty quick because the death was in early February, and in early March we were in a position to offer compensation. So that's one. There's a couple of other. There's about 3 or so applications for the death of someone as a motor vehicle accident, but they are for adult deceased, and so they are getting their letters of administration. They're sorting those matters out first to establish themselves as the personal representative of the estate of that deceased person before they submit the application. So, and we're helping out with that as well.
And are there future plans to create a website so that people can access the information easily?
You see, I'm glad you asked that. The website is almost ready. In fact, just this morning I was doing some final touches with our technical team, and that should be ready to be launched soon with all the necessary information. So it's just hopefully just days away.
And would you be having roadshows going out into the public to inform them better about the accident compensation scheme?
Absolutely. The awareness aspect is a priority for us.
Yeah.
It's a new scheme, and just on that, what I would like to say is that we've taken a proactive approach to this whole scheme. And what I mean when I say that is when we've learnt of people passing away in motor vehicle accidents or these injuries, we've actually gone out to proactively find them, advise them of their entitlements, and assist them through the process. So we haven't just sort of sat back and said, we'll just wait for the applications to come in, and then we'll process it. And given the nature of the scheme, and given its new and the scheme setup, we're there to help people. So it's about getting out and assisting them in whatever way we can. So we've literally either used information, the assistance of the police force or the community. Coconut Wireless is fantastic. Someone knows somebody, and we've managed to locate people and assist them in terms of applying for the compensation. So awareness is definitely a priority, and we'll be doing a whole bunch of things to get the message out there, including coming on fantastic shows like yours.
I believe that the first applicant was for this year was given compensation, or they need to come and pick up their compensation?
No, well, actually, what it is it's the one I just talked about recently. There's this death of a child, and we've considered the application, assisted, we've offered compensation. So all we're waiting for now is for them to basically confirm acceptance. As soon as they do that, we'll make the payment straight away.
You as the ACCF, rather, you do have I'd say the privilege of rejecting an application in certain circumstances, or is it an absolute necessary that you have to consider the application and give some sort of compensation?
Well, we won't. There's some applications where there's two things, or two aspects to that question. There are exclusions, in the sense that you may fall within a specific, like if you're driving drunk, or another exclusion, for example, is suicide, if you die from suicide, or if there's an attempted suicide and your injuries are as a result of that. So and of course these are reasonable exclusions. So if you fall under one of the exclusions, which we will look at and determine, then you wouldn't be eligible for compensation. So in terms of your question, we would consider it, but determine whether it's an exclusion. The one we won't consider is where, for example, someone refuses to provide particulars. So we say we're asking for this and we're asking for that, and there's an outright refusal. So we can't. I mean, the Act basically says those kind of applications won't be considered where the applicant refuses to provide information. So, of course, it'll be on hold, pending the provision of information. So there won't be any further consideration of that. We won't also consider applications where fraud is involved, and so that's the other one that won't be considered. And then, of course, under the Act, we won't consider applications which have already previously been determined. So if we've already gone through the process and made a determination, there won't be a consideration of another application, basically.
With companies, of course, having a lot of drivers and all of their company vehicles, what would happen then with all the passengers that are in there? The company would be liable to pay for the motor vehicle levy.
Yes, so the levy isn't based on the number of passengers and all that. The levy is based on a schedule, and you've got private, commercial, light goods passengers, and so on. So it's not the number of people you're going to carry as such, but it is. I mean, there is a levy that's paid based on that schedule. So with companies, I mean, they will just you have to see their vehicle type and just pay the pay the rate that's required, and of course LTA will help. They will tell you what vehicle it is and what the rate should be. But it's not like the compensation aspect isn't contingent on on how many people go in the vehicle and so on.
Thank you for that, Mr. Akbar. We'll go to a quick break right now and then we'll be back. You're watching For the Record. Good evening and welcome back. I believe that you have a question, Geraldine?
Yes, with the ACCF being established and CTP being taken out, now that we have got the motor vehicle levy, I suppose most people won't know the difference between that and car insurance. Of course, there is a clear difference between getting accident compensation and filing for compensation or some sort of insurance payout for your car itself.
I'm glad you asked that, because I've been asked that by a few people as well. So just to be very clear, the motor vehicle accident levy is in respect of coverage that a motor vehicle owner has around personal injuries and death. So that specifically, and it replaces the old CTP, that's a third-party policy, if you like. Comprehensive insurance, which is a completely separate thing in relation to the damage to your vehicle or anybody else's vehicle, that's completely separate, and that's something people should decide whether they want to purchase or not, but that's something that they should get advice on and talk to the insurance companies on separately. And of course, you'd want to probably get your vehicle insured and protect yourself in that respect. But that is a completely separate thing. So it's important that people not think that having paid the levy, you're kind of covered for the vehicle as well. It is quite separate and distinct, and you need to separately have that conversation with the insurance company around coverage for the vehicle. And look, I think one way to remember it, a simple way, in terms of an event, if something happens, I've had a couple of queries where people have called me and said, do you cover for the damage of the vehicle as well? And I said, well, no, we don't. The best way to remember it is damage to the vehicle, insurance company, damage to the person, ACCF. That's probably an easy way to remember it.
Of course, insurance companies must not be happy with this, the new scheme that you put forward.
Yeah, look, I mean, we've got a few insurance companies who've been providing cover, and in the main, there hasn't been a rebellion or anything like that. But this scheme has been signaled for a while, and I'm sure those who are involved with the issuing of third-party policies in the past would have preferred if that would have continued. But of course, that's that's something. This is something that has been signaled, and so I suppose at the end of the day, the government's introduction of this fantastic scheme was important for the greater good of Fijians, and we now have equity, and it addresses, from a social justice and economic justice point of view, there's equity across in our society by the introduction of schemes like this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's better for everyone.
Of course, with the car insurance, that is optional. It depends on the prerogative of the owner of the vehicle. But with the motor vehicle levy, is it compulsory?
It is compulsory, yes. Definitely.
And of course, prevention being better than cure. Any words that you'd like to offer to those who are on the roads, drivers, pedestrians, even passengers?
Look, absolutely. I mean, it's a bugbear of mine, and I'm sure we all experience it on a daily basis. There's some crazy drivers out there, unfortunately. And my message really is that try and avoid whether you're a driver, passenger, or pedestrian. Try to avoid placing yourself in a situation or finding yourself in a situation where you're having to need compensation. And it is a cliche, but prevention is indeed better than cure. And no amount of money is going to bring back a loved one, or bring back the use of your legs if you're paralyzed from a motor vehicle accident. So we seriously need to just be safe on the road. And I know we get annoyed when LTA or police officers pull us over, but they are doing a fantastic job trying to keep us all safe on the road. So we should applaud them, and really just so I'd like to get the message across about road safety. Let's just be safe on the road. But look, at the end of the day, if you do find yourself in the unfortunate position of being a victim of a motor vehicle accident, we're there to help you.
Lastly, of course, anything in the pipeline for the ACCF for this year?
Look, just really focusing on assisting applicants and compensating them where compensation is definitely due, and just really pushing the awareness of the scheme out there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you for that, Sam. Thank you for coming this evening on the show and enlightening us on the Accident Compensation Commission and the work that you do. I'm sure it'll help out a lot of families, especially in the areas of getting compensated for accidents.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Geraldine, and thank you, FBC, for the opportunity.
If you have any further inquiries about the Accident Compensation Commission Fiji and its functions, you can direct your emails to info@acc.org.fj or telephone number 322-3330. Up next, though, Nemani Ndelemba Tiki with My Say, and we hope that you enjoyed the show tonight. From Geraldine, the team, and I, have a good evening.